guys, I'm Pranamya and you're watching Pages of the Globe. Alright, so if you're new to my channel, basically every single day I read stories from all over the world and then I tell you a little bit about the author, I give you an analysis, and then I post it here on YouTube. And today's story is Araby by James Joyce. Now before I go into it, if you're scared that a 10-year-old girl is about to read to you a story and then give you an analysis about it, please watch the intro video on my channel. I promise, A, I'm not 10 years old and I will give you all my credentials and hopefully you'll trust me a little bit more. But anyway, today's story is, yes, like I said before, Araby by James Joyce. James Joyce was an Irish writer known for his innovative techniques and specifically literary techniques and complex narratives. His more popular works you may have read or heard before include Ulysses and A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which are very celebrated for their deep exploration of consciousness and the pioneering use of stream of consciousness. You may have read these before and they're actually super interesting. I would totally recommend you checking them out. And if you want me to, I can actually go ahead and read it and do an analysis about it on my channel. His writing is very profoundly influenced by modernist literature and we continue to study it today because of its linguistic creativity and thematic depth. The story that we're going to be reading today, Araby, has a lot of depth to it, and at first it seems like a very basic story and you might be a little confused, but it's actually very good, I promise. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what it's about. It's about this narrator he lives in Dublin, Ireland. So like I said, James Joyce is from Ireland, and so the narrator, he lives in Dublin and he just has a very basic life, but he is in love with his best friend's, not his best friend, but his friend's sister. And it's just about what he thinks about her, their interactions, and it has a lot more depth to it. There's a lot of metaphors in there, so I think if you're the kind of person who enjoys a story that really makes you think hard about it, you will definitely enjoy Araby by James Joyce. Without further ado, let's get on with the story. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next. Araby by James Joyce. North Richmond Street, being blind, was a quiet street except at the hour where the Christian's Brothers' School set the boys free. An uninhabited house of 2 stories stood at the blind end, detached from its neighbors in a square ground. The other houses of the street, conscious of decent lives within them, gazed at one another in brown, imperturbable faces. The former tenant of our house, a priest, had died in the back drawing room. Air, musty from having been long enclosed, hung in all the rooms, and the waste room behind the kitchen was littered with old, useless papers. Among these, I found a few paper-covered books, the pages of which were curled and damp. The Abbot by Walter Scott, The Devout Communicant, and the Memoirs of Vidocq. I liked the last best because its leaves were yellow. The wild garden behind the house contained a central apple tree and a few straggling bushes, under one of which I found the late tenant's rusty bicycle pump. He had been a very charitable priest. In his will, he had left all his money to institutions and the furniture of his house to his sister. When the short days of winter came, dusk fell before we had well eaten our dinners, and when we met in the street, the houses had grown somber. The space of sky above us was the color of ever-changing violet, and towards it, the lamps of the street lifted their feeble lanterns. The cold air stung us, and we played until our bodies glowed. Our shouts echoed in the silent street. The career of our play brought through the dark, muddy lanes behind the houses, where we ran our gauntlet of the rough tribes from the cottages to the back doors of the dark, dripping gardens, where odors arose from the ash pits, to the dark, odorous stables, where coachmen smoothed and combed the horse, or shook music from the buckled harness. When we returned to the street, light from the kitchen windows had filled the areas. If my uncle was seen turning the corner, we hid in the shadow until we had seen him safely housed. Or if Mangan's sister came out on the doorstep to call her brother into his tea, we watched her from our shadow peer up and down the street. We waited to see whether she would remain or go in. If she remained, we left our shadow and walked up to Mangan's steps resignedly. She was always waiting for us, her figure defined by the light of the half-open door. Her brother always teased her before he obeyed, and I stood by the railings looking at her. Her dress swung as she moved her body, and the soft rope of hair tossed from side to side. Every morning I lay on the floor in the front parlor watching her door. The blind was pulled down to within an inch of the sash, so I could not be seen. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leaped. I ran to the hall, seized my books, and followed her. I kept her brown figure always in my eye, and when we came near to the point after which our ways diverged, I quickened my pace and passed her. This happened morning after morning. I had never spoken to her except for a few casual words, yet her name was like a summons to all my foolish blood. Her image accompanied me, even in places the most hostile to romance. On Saturday evenings, when my aunt went marketing, I had to go carry some of the parcels. We walked through the flaring streets, jostled by drunken men and bargaining women, amid the curses of laborers, the shrill litanies of shop boys who stood on guard by the barrels of pigs' cheeks, the nasal chanting of street singers who sang a "Come All You" about O'Donovan Rosa, or a ballad about the troubles in our native land. These noises converged in a single sensation of life for me. I imagined that I bore my chalice safely through a throng of foes. Her name sprang to my lips at moments in strange prayers and praises, which I myself did not understand. My eyes were often full of tears, I could not tell why, and at moments a flood from my heart seemed to pour itself out into my bosom. I thought little of the future. I didn't know whether I would ever speak to her or not. If I spoke to her, how could I tell her of my confused adoration? But my body was like a harp, and her words and gestures were like fingers running upon the wires. One evening I went to the back drawing room, in which the priest had died. It was a dark, rainy evening, and there was no sound in the house. Through one of the broken panes, I heard the rain impinge upon the earth, the fine, incessant needles of water playing in the sodden beds. Some distant lamp or lighted window gleamed below at me. I was thankful that I could see so little. All my senses seemed to desire to veil themselves, and feeling that I was about to slip from them, I pressed the palms of my hands together until they trembled, murmuring, oh love," many times. And at last she spoke to me. When she addressed the first words to me, I was so confused that I didn't know what to answer. She asked if I was going to Araby. I forgot whether I answered yes or no. It would be a splendid bazaar. She said she would love to go. And why can't you? I asked. While she spoke, she turned a silver bracelet round and round her wrist. She could not go, she said, because there would be a retreat that week in our convent. Her brother and 2 other boys were fighting for their caps, and I was alone at the railings. She held one of the spikes, bowing her head towards me. The light from the lamp opposite our door caught on the white curve of her neck, lit up her hair that rested there, and falling, lit up the hand upon the railing. It fell over one side of her dress and caught the white border of the petticoat, just visible as she stood with ease. It's well for you, she said. If I go, I said, I'll bring you something. What innumerable follies laid waste my waking and sleeping thoughts after that evening. I wished to annihilate the tedious intervening days. I chafed against the work of school. At night in my bedroom, and by day in the classroom, her image came between me and the page I strove to read. The symbols of the word Araby were called to me through the silence in which my soul luxuriated and cast an Eastern enchantment over me. I was asked to leave to go to the bazaar on Saturday night. My aunt was surprised and hoped it was not for some Freemason affair. I answered few questions in class. I watched my master's face pass from kindness to sternness. He hoped I was not beginning to idle. I could not call my wandering thoughts together. I hardly had any patience with the serious work of life, which now that it stood between me and my desire, seemed to me child's play. Ugly, monotonous child's play. On Saturday morning, I was reminded by my uncle that I wished to go to the bazaar in the evening. He was fussing at the hall stand, looking for the hat brush, and answered me curtly, "Yes, boy, I know." As he was in the hall, I could not go into the front parlor and lie at the window. I felt the house in bad humor and walked slowly to the school. The air was pitilessly raw and my heart already misgave me. When I came home to dinner, my uncle had still not yet come home. Still, it was early. I sat staring at the clock for some time, and when it began ticking, it irritated me. I left the room. I mounted the staircase and gained the upper part of the house. The high, cold, empty, gloomy rooms liberated me, and I went from room to room singing. From the front window, I saw my companions playing below the street. Their cries reached me, weakened and indistinct, and leaning my forehead against the cool glass, I looked over at the dark house where she lived. I may have stood there for an hour, seeing nothing but the brown-clad figure cast by my imagination, touched discreetly by the lamplight at the curved neck and the hand upon the railings, and at the border below the dress. When I came downstairs again, I found Miss Mercer sitting at the fire. She was an old, garrulous woman, a pawnbroker's widow who collected used stamps for some pious purpose. I had to endure the gossip of the tea table. The meal was prolonged beyond an hour, and still my uncle did not come. Miss Mercer stood up to go. She was sorry she couldn't wait any longer, but it was after 8 o'clock, and she did not like to be out late, as the night air was bad for her. When she had gone, I began to walk up and down the room, clenching my fists. My aunt said, "I'm afraid you may have to put off your bazaar for this night of our Lord." At 9 o'clock, I heard my uncle's latchkey in the hall door. I heard him talking to himself and heard the hall stand rocking when it had received the weight of his overcoat. I could interpret these signs. When he was midway through dinner, I asked him to give me the money to go to the bazaar. He had forgotten. "The people are in bed and after their first sleep now," he said. I did not smile. My aunt said to him energetically, "Can't you give him the money and let him go? You've kept him late enough as it is." My uncle said he was very sorry and he had forgotten. He said he believed in the old saying, "All work makes Jack a dull boy." He asked me where I was going, and when I told him a second time, he asked me did I know the Arab's farewell to his steed. When I left the kitchen, he was about to recite the opening lines of his behest to my aunt. I had a florin tightly in my hand as I strode down Buckingham Street towards the station. The sight of the streets thronged with buyers and glaring with gas recalled to me the purpose of my journey. I took my seat in a third-class carriage of a deserted train. Among an intolerable delay, the train moved out to the station slowly. It crept onward among ruinous houses and over the twinkling river. At Westland Row Station, a crowd of people pressed the carriage doors, but the porters moved them back, saying that it was a special train for the bazaar. I remained alone in the bare carriage. In a few minutes, the train drew up beside the improvised wooden platform. I passed out onto the road and saw by the lighted dial of a clock that it was 10 minutes to 10. In front of me was a large building which displayed the magical name. I could not find any sixpenny entrance, and fearing the bazaar would be closed, I passed in quickly through a turnstile, handing a shilling to a weary-looking man. I found myself in a big hall girded at half its height by a gallery. Nearly all the stalls were closed, and the greater part of the hall was in darkness. I recognized a silence like that which pervades a church, and after a service, I walked into the center of the bazaar timidly. A few people were gathered by the stalls that were still open. Before a curtain, over which the words Café Chantant were still written in colored lamps, 2 men were counting money on a salver. I listened to the fall of the coins. Remembering with difficulty why I had come, I went over to one of the stalls and examined porcelain vases, and flowered tea sets. At a door of the stall, a young lady was talking and laughing with two young gentlemen. I remarked their English accents and listened vaguely to their conversation. "Oh, I never said such a thing." "Oh, but you did." "Oh, I didn't say that." "Didn't you say that?" "Yes, I heard her." "Oh, there's a fib." Observing me, the young lady came over and asked me did I wish to buy anything. The tone of her voice was not encouraging. She seemed to have spoken to me out of a sense of duty. I looked humbly at the great jars that stood like Eastern guards at either side of the dark entrance to the stall and murmured, "No, thank you." The young lady changed the position of one of the vases and went back to the young men. They began to talk of the same subject. Once or twice, the young lady glanced at me over her shoulder. I lingered before her stall, though I knew my stay was useless, to make my interest in her wares seem the more real. Then I turned away slowly, walked down the middle of the bazaar. I allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the 6 pence in my pocket. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery that the light was out. The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity, and my eyes burned with anguish and anger. The end. Alright, so that was our story, Araby by James Joyce. Now, when you first hear the story or read the story, you may be confused because it seems like almost an unfinished story. It's very basic. I mean, just for a quick summary, there's this narrator who we don't even know the name of, but he lives on the street where his house is. And he talks about like the history of the house before his family moved in and the games that he and his friends play. But the main part of the story is when he starts talking about the sister of his friend, Mangan, or Manjin, or whatever his friend's name is. Now, the sister often will come to like the front of the house to call the brother, and that kind of moment is a moment that the narrator savors. I mean, he thinks about every single moment he has with her. He's always trying to catch glimpses of her. He's like obsessed with her. He adores her in his own words. Now, normally he actually doesn't ever talk to her, but one morning she just asks him if he plans to go to Araby, which is this Dublin bazaar. She says that she can't attend because she's already like committed to something else. But this narrator is like, "Oh, I'll bring you something from the bazaar." Now this very, very brief encounter launches him into this like restless period of just waiting and like fidgety tension. He can't focus in schools. He doesn't really pay attention to what's going around him. All he's thinking about is the sister of his friend. Now, the morning of the bazaar, the narrator, he's like constantly reminding everyone, he's like, "Oh, remember I have to go to the bazaar." But his uncle comes late. So by the time he finally comes, this narrator, he's obviously a child. He's very impatient. And he's like, "Okay, just give me the money and go." So he goes and he catches a very late train and he approaches a stall that's still open. And there's not a lot of stalls that are open at this point because it's like almost 10. But as he approaches there, he decides to buy nothing because he feels like unwanted by this woman. And at that point, there's no purchase. He hasn't bought anything. And the lights go out in the bazaar. So it's basically deserted now. There's no one in the bazaar anymore. It's closing down and he's just super angry. Now, this seems like a weird story because like I said before, it's just unfinished. Like, what's going on? We don't even know what happens at the end. We don't understand. We're like, you waited all this time. Every single day you think about this sister. You've been in this like sort of weird, tense period of waiting and you didn't even buy anything at the end. You still had a couple minutes. Like, you could have bought something, right? So we're all kind of confused. So if you look, you might have to like read between a little bit more in the lines, but this is my analysis, and if you have any type of other analysis, please comment it down below because this was like a very strange story to me and I really had to like research about it because I was like, what is going on? So first of all, in Araby, this story is obviously not actually about like some sort of, I mean, yeah, it's about like a love that this boy has, but there's so many metaphors in this story specifically. So the sister, I'm just gonna call her the sister, but the sister, she's like this brown figure. He's always referring to her as like a brown figure, and that kind of reflects the brown facades of the buildings and like the ones that line the street, and that kind of evokes the skin color and like these romanticized images of Arabia, and those flood the narrator's head. So like the bazaar, that offers experiences that differ from everyday Dublin. I mean, if you're thinking Dublin, like Ireland, they're gonna have their own type of culture, but this bazaar is offering something that's very different, hence the name Araby. Now, this sister, she's like almost intoxicating the narrator with these new feelings of like joy and elation, and his love for her is like now competing for the dullness of schoolwork, his uncle's lateness, and the Dublin trains. Now, he promises this sister that he's gonna go to Araby and like get a gift for her, but these mundane realities of life undermine his plans and ultimately thwart his desires. Because at the end of the day, because his uncle came late from work that he goes to every single day, the kid didn't have that much time. And then because the shop owner was talking to two boys and she wasn't really interested in what was going on with the narrator, he felt he couldn't buy anything. And as the bar closes down, he kind of realizes that this sister is also going to fail his expectations, and that his desire for her is more like a vain wish for change. The narrator's change of heart concludes the story in this almost moment of epiphany, but it's not a very positive one. Instead of reaffirming his love for her, or realizing that he doesn't even need a gift to just show the sister that he like loves her, he just gives up. He kind of interprets his arrival at the bazaar as like it fades into darkness, as a sign that his relationship with the sister is just this sort of wishful idea, and that his infatuation is just as misguided as his fantasies about the bazaar were. Now, what might have been a very happy story of like youthful love and just like the kind of story that gives you butterflies, and when you read it, you're like, oh, I'm sure they're gonna end up together. When they're 80 years old down the line, they'll have a bunch of grandkids running around. Instead of that kind of story, it becomes more of just like this tragic story of defeat. And it's very like disturbing and unfilling. It's very similar to the adventure in An Encounter, which is another story that I would actually recommend that you guys go ahead and look into if you liked this one. But the narrator's failure at this bazaar suggests that this fulfillment and contentedness that remain foreign to Dubliners, even in the most unusual events of city, like an annual bazaar. The tedious events of that kind of delay the narrator's trip to indicate that there's no room exists for love in the daily lives. And the absence of love renders these characters in the stories almost anonymous. I mean, if you think about it, there's very few characters that are actually named other than the friend, Mungan. Like, even in the story itself, the narrator is nameless, and the girl is always Mungan's sister, as though she's just like any sort of girl next door. And the story closes with the narrator imagining himself as a creature. In Araby, James Joyce, the author, suggests that all people experience frustrated desire for love and new experiences. And I think that's a very powerful message, especially because it kind of shows the stark difference between reality and like this type of love that we're constantly chasing. And I think even though the story itself at first glance it's just a very strange story, the more you start to read into it, you almost feel just as frustrated and angry as the narrator does. I mean, I know at the very last part, I was like, come on, man, you didn't pay attention in school. You are walking up and down your room, like, so concerned on all of that, just to realize that, like, there's no point to it. And it genuinely feels so heart-wrenching almost, I think, because as the narrator comes to an epiphany, we come to an epiphany as well as the reader or as the listener, that at the end of the day, the reality will almost always rule over the sort of infatuation we have. And I think it's very important to know that what the narrator had for the sister was not necessarily this sort of love, but it was more of an infatuation and obsession with this type of strange new thing. And again, it wasn't necessarily for the sister herself, but for the change that she was going to bring in his rather dull life. Now again, this is an analysis that I've kind of decided on myself. If you have another one, please share it with me in the comments, because I will be so interested to know what you think about it. But yeah, that's about it. That's it for the video. Remember to like, share, please subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next. If you guys commented, I will read it. I literally promise. You could ask me to read the shortest short story in the world, which I think Hemingway wrote, and I will read that, and I will do like a 20-minute analysis over it, even though it is one sentence. I promise. So just comment it and I will read it. I promise. But yeah, that's it for today. Bye!